welcome to me talking about Act 3 of Homestuck and also the intermission, because I've tried to make this video like 3 times and I kept running out of time, or it got too dark, or my camera died, and I'm finally getting around to it. But since I filmed my Act 2 reaction video, I have not only finished Act 3, but I've also finished the intermission, and I've also started Act 4. So all the acts are starting to blend together a little bit, so forgive me if I don't remember exactly what happens in Act 3, but I'm gonna sort of talk about Act 3 and also the intermission. And if you haven't watched my previous videos talking about my Homestuck reread, I will link them down below, or I'll link a playlist up here or something. There'll be a link somewhere to my Act 1 and Act 2 reaction videos. I did take some notes, so hopefully I'll stay on track about what I wanted to say about Act 3, but forgive me if this gets a little rambly. So the first thing I wanted to say is that in Act 3, we get to meet Jade, which feels quite late actually in the story, that we wait all the way until Act 3 to meet Jade. I kind of forgot how elusive she is. It's also interesting how I forgot how mysterious Jade is, you know? Early on in the story, she knows so much about the game that the other kids don't know. And when you're reading for the first time, it is very interesting, why does she know these things? What is Jade hiding almost? Even though she's not really hiding. I mean, I guess she's kind of hiding something, but I don't know. Jade seems like a very mysterious, almost suspicious character early on, which is interesting when you think about the later acts and how suspicious everyone was of Jake English, and because of his name, and was he connected to Lord English? There's something about those English Harleys that's they aren't suspicious people at all. They're very genuine, but early on in the story, the way they're presented in the story makes them seem a little bit suspicious, which is very interesting. The other thing about Act 3 is that at the end of Act 3, the actual flash that ends Act 3, that's when Rose enters the medium, and Dave and Jade still haven't entered the medium, which I felt like the kids entered the medium way earlier than they did. John enters the medium at the end of Act 1, nobody enters the medium in Act 2, and Rose doesn't enter the medium until end of Act 3. It takes a while. I know Act 4 is a lot longer than the first 3 acts, and then Act 5 is way longer, but I don't know, it takes a while. In my first 2 videos, I talked a little bit about how Act 1 really serves as the first opening act of a movie or whatever that gets the characters from the normal world into the world of the story, right? And Act 3 is interesting because a lot happens in Act 3, but it feels like the story is just kind of going along. Act 3 doesn't feel very specifically different from the other acts, or it has any very specific plot purpose that Act 2 and Act 4 don't serve. Honestly, looking at Homestuck as a whole, I sort of feel Act 1 definitely works as one act. Act 2, 3, and 4 could almost all be one act together. They're all very similar. And then Act 5 obviously is quite different because you meet the trolls and that stuff happens. But I don't know. Maybe comment below if you can think of a reason why 2, 3, and 4, what differentiates them? What is different between 2, 3, and 4? I don't know. It's interesting. I'm trying to think about it while I'm reading it, how is this act different from the previous ones? And 2 and 3 feel very similar. One thing we do get a lot of in Act 3 is the mayor and the carapaces. Their story really starts to come together. We start to learn a lot more about Spurb and Skaya, a lot through the mayor and also through Jade, and the game starts to be more relevant. It's not just 4 kids messed around in their rooms. It starts to get a bit bigger. And we start to meet some trolls. We get the conversation between Kinea and Rose. We get a conversation between Karkat and Jade. We get a conversation between Tavros and Dave, which, by the way, the conversation between Tavros and Dave in Act 3 is one of my favorite Pesterlogs of all time, because I love Dave and I love Tavros and I love their relationship, and it's just such a good Pesterlog. If you haven't, if you don't remember that specific Pesterlog, it's the only Pesterlog Dave and Tav have in Act 3, so you can probably find it quite easily on the wiki. It is so good. One of my favorite Pesterlogs of all time. Go read it if you haven't recently. And that's sort of what Act 3 is, basically. It's more about the kids starting to enter the game, more about John entering the medium, more about the carapaces, starting to learn more about Spurb, and then starting to meet the trolls. Just a tiny, tiny bit, and then I know they're going to be in Act 4 a lot more. And then obviously Act 5 is when you meet them for real. But yeah, Act 3, good so far. Quite similar to Act 2, but very good. And then, the other thing I wanted to talk about in this video, it was going to be 2 separate videos, but like I said, I didn't get around to filming this video until I had already finished the intermission, so I'm just going to smash them together. The intermission! I love the intermission. I have a really clear memory from the first time I read Homestuck back in 2011, of reading the intermission, and not understanding at all how it was relevant to the rest of the story yet, which is why, I think most people when they first read Homestuck, unless they've been told, don't know or understand how the intermission is related to the rest of the story until later on. I know early on a lot of people tended to skip the intermission because it felt so irrelevant, but obviously rereading it now, it's so relevant. It is incredibly tied into the rest of Homestuck. Like, obviously, like, that's when we're first introduced to Lord English, the Felt, the Midnight Crew, Lord English, all of that, Snowman, all super relevant to the rest of Homestuck, like incredibly relevant. And the Intermission also introduces like so much fun time travel stuff, not all of which is actually like super important to the plot, but all of the Felt's time travel is so fun. I love like weird time travel stuff, and I just had such a good time rereading the Intermission. It's so funny, the time travel is so fun, the Midnight Crew is really funny, it's just really good. I love the Intermission. If you don't like the Intermission, you're missing out. It's the best, not the best part of Homestuck. Like, I love the main characters and stuff, but the Intermission is so funny. And I think it's also like sort of a reference to Problem Sleuth, which again, I need to read Problem Sleuth. Maybe that's what I'll do when I finish catching up on Homestuck or rereading Homestuck, because I never read Problem Sleuth, and people are always like, you should read Problem Sleuth, especially if you like the Intermission and stuff. I've never gotten around to it. Someday I'll read Problem Sleuth. And the last thing I wanted to say about the Intermission is at the end of the Intermission, we briefly see Karkat. We actually see Karkat long before Act 5. I think we actually do start to see the trolls in Act 4 a little bit, like just in brief flashes, but the first time we see Karkat, just a little bit, is at the end of the Intermission. Because again, the Intermission is so closely tied to the rest of Homestuck. And it's cool, like, I feel like I didn't give Hussey enough credit. I feel like when I always kind of felt like the first few acts, Hussey was just kind of making it up as he went along and he didn't quite know where the story was gonna go, but like, so much of what happens in Act 3 and the Intermission, like, so much of that is so relevant later on. Like, he definitely had stuff planned ahead. Like, there's no way things could be that connected without, like, intentional planning. Like, not even just, like, setting things up with the idea that maybe I'll come back to it, but, like, clearly planned ahead. It's really cool to see, like, how rich the story of Homestuck is. Like, I always knew it was rich and interwoven, but, like, reading it the first time, you don't see the foreshadowing because you don't know what's gonna happen. But, like, reading it now and knowing what happens later, it is actually so well presented, and so much stuff that the first time around like didn't make sense and I had to read the recaps and read the wiki and get into the fandom to understand. Now with like the foresight of knowing what happens in Homestuck, so much stuff makes so much more sense and is such cool foreshadowing. So that's probably how I'll end this video. Leave you with the information that if you decide to reread Homestuck, I think it's going to be a really rich experience because it is so fun to reread Homestuck with like the knowledge of what happens later and to be able to like pick up on all that very good foreshadowing. It's very fun. So that's my little ramble about Act 3 and the Intermission. Once I finish Act 4, I'll do another one of these. And if you're interested in watching that, you can subscribe down below, like this video if you enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm rereading Homestuck, and I am going to do a video for every act or like sub-act. I'm not sure exactly how I'm gonna divide it yet. Probably do a separate video for like Act 5, Act 1, Act 5, Act 2, but we'll see. So thanks for watching, and if you're also rereading Homestuck, or you're thinking of rereading Homestuck, or you're reading Homestuck for the first time, comment down below and let me know what you think, because it's always fun to talk about Homestuck. Thanks for watching.